Welcome. Today on Threads of Truth we are diving into the world of the paranormal and exploring some of the most chilling and intriguing encounters that people have had with the unknown. So, no more time to waste. Let's begin. Everyone who's worked in a hospital will tell you that unless it's brand new, it'll be haunted. I didn't believe this until I started working as a nurse at a rural hospital 2 or 3 years ago. I had a few experiences myself on night shift and got told some by other nurses. The nurses' station on the ortho ward had a view of just across hallway to the side. You could only see about a doorway's width of the hallway from inside the nurses' station. One night I stood up with my arms full of patient notes to put away when a woman in an old-timey white nurse's dress and hat ran in front of the doorway, except she moved too fast for normal human speed. Also, we wore navy scrubs. It was so fast it took me a second to process it, but when I did I dropped the notes and screamed. The other nurses ran in and when I explained it they laughed and one of the veterans, she'd worked on the ward for 14 years, said, "Oh yeah, that's the matron. She just likes to make sure everything is in order." I never saw her again, but after talking to other nurses on that ward, apparently she is a common appearance on night shift. She never messes with anyone, she just gets seen every now and then. A few months later I got moved to the kids' ward. We had a playroom for the kids, but at night it was locked up. There are also security cameras all over the ward common areas for safety reasons. For example, parents who don't have custody visiting without permission, etc. One week I did 4 night shifts. 2 nights in a row I saw a little boy run from the bottom left to the top right of the screen on the security camera feed. But when I would check, the playroom was empty and the door was locked. On the 3rd night this happened, I told my supervisor because I was really freaking out. She told me that she hadn't been told about what I'd seen before, but there were plenty of ghosts on the kids' ward. Apparently in the back 2 teen rooms, the patient would often ask the nurses to tell the patient next door to stop laughing so loudly when the room next door would actually be empty. There's also parents reporting a nurse checking on their child through the night that doesn't match the description of anyone working, laughing being heard at odd hours. There were lots of stories. It was enough to make me believe that maybe ghosts are real. Bonus story. Working in the nursery one night I was bottle feeding a baby and chatting with the other nurse who was originally from India. I asked her about ghosts and she told me that at the hospital where she worked in India, there was a nurse who was bottle feeding a baby at night, and she fell asleep, dropped the baby and it died. It was completely an accident, but the poor woman felt so guilty about it that she ended up committing suicide about 6 months later. The nurse told me that since then, some nurses have reported that if they're feeling really tired while holding babies at night, they'll feel a light tapping on their shoulder to wake them up. This woman wasn't going to let it happen to anyone else. Years ago, I was living outside of Buffalo, New York on an old estate on the Lake Erie shore. I rented the carriage house of an old mansion that a doctor and his wife owned. The doctor was a heart surgeon, and they were a well-to-do couple with multiple properties, so they weren't around that often. I liked the solitude of the place, having just gotten divorced, and although the carriage house was slightly decrepit, I loved living there. The mansion looked over the lake, and my house was closer to the road, off a private drive that went from one side of the estate to the other. The carriage house had been servants' quarters for whoever lived in the mansion at the turn of the 20th century. There was an enclosed courtyard outside my door that was bordered by the back of my house, the carriage barn, which had stored carriages back in the horse and buggy days, a row of empty horse stalls, and a brick wall with an entrance into the courtyard. It was a very cool place to live. The rent was cheap, and there was a private, 150-foot beach that was hardly ever used by anybody but me. But it was very isolated if there was nobody staying in the mansion. And there weren't any close neighbors because all the houses along the road were big estates, and a lot of the rich people living in the area weren't full-time residents. But I was young and brave, and it was a big estate full of decaying spookiness, and I'm a weirdo that likes that kind of stuff, so I was overjoyed to find the place. One night I was coming home late, around 1 a.m. from a friend's house. Driving down a street a mile or two from my house, I saw a dark figure up ahead, standing close to the road. I thought that was kind of odd, because it was late at night on a weekday, not exactly party time in the Buffalo South towns. I started to get a little nervous, because the person was standing as if they were waiting for someone to pick them up, and as I got closer, I could see they were wearing an unusual, black, shroud-like thing. Long and dark and draped, with part of it wrapped over the person's head to look like a hood. Similar to someone wearing an abaya and a hijab, only much looser, like a bunch of material just wrapped around someone's body. It seemed totally inappropriate to what I knew of the people that lived in the area to see anybody wearing anything like that, and certainly not outside at 1 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. The person was just standing by the side of the road, looking stooped over and old. I slowed down to a crawl as I approached, worried that the person needed help. Maybe it was an old senile person that had walked out of their house in the middle of the night, confused? When I got close enough to really see the person, she lifted her head and looked my way, and I saw that it was my ex-mother-in-law. I was absolutely, positively, sure it was her. The same gray-brown hair, the same eyes, the same enigmatic smile that had always made me wonder what she was thinking about but never saying. She raised her hand and waved at me. Not a stop and help me wave, but more of a gosh it's good to see you wave. It scared the hell out of me. My mother-in-law had died 3 years previous to when I was driving down that road. I sped up and kept driving, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. But after a few minutes and a few deep breaths, I told myself I should go back and take another look. My mother-in-law had loved me. I couldn't imagine her ghost would appear seeking revenge on me for divorcing her son, who had not treated me well, to say the least. I drove in a square by making left turns and went down the same road again, but there was no one there. I was too freaked out to go back to my spooky carriage house with the weird sounds and 100-year-old history, with nobody there but me and the ghosts I was convinced probably inhabited the place, so I drove to the local all-night Greek diner and sat there for an hour drinking coffee and calming my nerves. When I finally drove home and into the courtyard, I could see that something was wrong. My door was standing open, the glass windows broken, the door cracked almost all the way through from one side to the other. Someone had destroyed the door to get into the house. The next day, I found a crowbar in the courtyard, thrown off to the side. The only things I noticed missing from the house were a few pieces of my clothing, super creepy, a jar of loose change, and a knife from the kitchen. I was just divorced and not exactly rich, I didn't have much worth stealing. It's very scary when someone breaks into the house you live in all by yourself in an isolated spot. They must have driven right into the courtyard, and would have been hidden from view while they broke down the door. I called the cops. They never caught anyone. With all the upset of the break-in, it wasn't until hours later that I remembered seeing my dead mother-in-law waving at me from the side of the road, dressed like the Grim Reaper. I'm convinced that she somehow appeared to delay me from going home. That if I had driven straight to the carriage house, whoever the person or persons were, who had broken my solid wood, 100-year-old door practically in half with a crowbar, might have been waiting there for me, or I could have surprised them, and things might have turned out very differently, maybe very badly, for me. Now I write fictional horror stories. I even wrote a whole ghost story novel. But this story is 100%, real life, true. I swear on my ex-mother-in-law's grave it really happened. You might even say that seeing Mom by the side of the road that night is part of the reason I write scary stories. So it's my recommendation that people should remember to be nice to their mothers-in-law. She might help you out even after she's dead. I have a story, it isn't mine, but it happened to my uncle. He used to tell this story when we went camping and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah and my uncle, Mark, went on a mission at 19. They sent him to an Indian reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion named Carl. When they first got there, there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation grounds. Eventually they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night, they were trying to sleep when all of a sudden their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under their table for cover. Mark could distinctively hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people. After about 5 minutes, it stopped. That next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking that night before. The family got very quiet and then told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that, due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. They then go into a convenience store and they were talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused, they ask him, "Can't talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about the skinwalkers. He says they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, flew it open, and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw these 3 animals run off. 2 were a wolf, 1 was a bear. But they looked strange. Almost with human features. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on 2 legs, and walked slowly towards the trees making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so bad that they called their mission president that next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day. For a year nothing happened. Then, one day, they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and they go to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We are driving through a dangerous area at night, so we can't make any stops. If you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I am fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark, "I am not kidding, go to your business." Jimmy was insistent he was fine. So they hit the road. As they were about 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries. Jimmy starts complaining that he needed to pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You'll have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on, "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you will do your business next to the door, and if I say get into the car, you better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right." Opens the door, and starts to do his business. About 5 seconds later the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out, "What is going on?" The mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car to his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They didn't speak through the whole ordeal, and says, "What did I just see?" The mission president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." My mother went to Eastern Washington University and stayed in one of the houses the locals rented out to college students. I cannot give the exact age of the house, but it was old enough to have a built-in button on the floor that would call up to the servants in the attic, so the house was relatively old. During her studies there she had 3 different roommates. My uncle was the first, who then was replaced by my mother's best friend, who was replaced by my father. All 3 of them can confirm strange happenings in this house and be woken up in the middle of the night with people whispering. The worst of it was in my mother's room in the attic. My mother hated that house, but she didn't have anywhere else to live and the dorms were expensive, so she sucked it up and lived there until she graduated. She hated sleeping alone. The air in her room constantly felt thick and heavy. Her closet was constantly freezing cold, and at night she would hear multiple people whispering incoherent words at once. While living there, my mother had a cat named Puss who would constantly hide under the bed. One time my mother caught Puss out from under her bed, sitting, watching, and growling at one of the corners of the room. My mother went over to Puss, confused at what she was looking at, until she saw a black figure in the corner slowly start to move upwards toward the ceiling. Puss started to become more aggressive, her hissing and growling getting louder before she freaked out and shot off back under the bed, still growling at the corner until the black figure was gone. My mother had never seen Puss act like this, since Puss was usually a very loving and happy cat, but whatever that was clearly terrified her cat. Sometime later my mother was talking with a friend who was excited to be touring 2 famous paranormal investigators around the college and town, showing them supposed haunted places. My mother brought up the fact that she has always had weird stuff happening in her house and thinks it may be haunted. Her friend got excited and begged her to let him bring them to her house. My mother refused, since she wasn't willing to stay up late for some people that she doesn't even know. My mother didn't know at the time who these investigators were, since she never really kept up with paranormal stuff, believing it can let evil into your life. She only knew that they were on quite a few popular talk shows at the time. These 2 investigators were Ed and Lorraine Warrens. Around midnight my mother's best friend comes to her and tells her that there are people at the door wanting to speak to her. Confused, my mother got in a robe and went to the front door. There she saw her tour guide friend with 12 other students behind Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine asked my mother if they could come in, as their guide told them that it is possible her house is haunted. My mother agreed and let them all in. Lorraine asked my mother where in the house is the haunting more active, and my mother told her that it was in her bedroom, that she would take Ed and Lorraine there, but everyone else had to wait here. They agreed and my mother took Ed and Lorraine to her room. When my mother entered her room, she sat on her bed and asked if they could feel it, how heavy the air was. Ed and Lorraine agreed that the air was heavy, like how some of the haunted places they have been to. Lorraine walked around the room then to the closest and asked if she could hear voices here. My mother broke down crying and said she could hear them every night and that it kept her up at night. Lorraine told her that it was possible that her closest is a doorway for those who passed on, or a doorway to hell. My mother continued to cry before Lorraine came over to her and told her that the reason this stuff is happening to her is because of her mom's family, that the women have some connection with those beyond, and that it's possible that they are psychics, which makes the dead attracted to her. My mother then told Lorraine about the black figure, which Lorraine told her that wasn't from this house but was connected to her family, mainly her dad's side, and that it most likely went after her grandfather, her father, and now her. The figure isn't a ghost or a demon but something pure evil, and that it wants her. Fearful, my mother asked them if they could bless her room, which they did, and after further investigation of the house, Ed and Lorraine told her that her house was the first place that actually showed activity and signs of haunting in the whole area. After they finished blessing the house, Ed and Lorraine left. Time passed and my mom's best friend moved out and my dad moved in. The activity in the house still continued even after the blessing. At first, my father was skeptical of the house being haunted until one night while sleeping in my mom's bed he heard the whispering. He asked my mother what she said and she told him she didn't say anything. After a few moments of silence between them, she asked if he could hear them. Confused, my father asked what she was talking about and she told him the whispering. He then agreed that she heard the whispering and asked where it was coming from, which she then told her it was from the closest and it happens every night. Sometime after, my father got curious about whether or not the servants' button still worked. Originally no one had ever been up into the attic. Both of my parents made their way up to the attic but never reached the top, since on their way there they couldn't breathe as the temperatures had dropped. My mother started to panic as she felt like she was being choked. She quickly told my father turn back around because it felt as though they were not wanted up there. Not wanting to upset my mother more, my father agreed and turned back around, never to go up there again. Once my mother graduated college, they moved out of the house, and strange events continued to happen no matter where they moved. Around the time I was born, my parents lived in a rather small house with my 2 older brothers. Constantly our cats would freak out, growling and hissing at the corners of the house. Not only that, but my mother would constantly see this black figure around the house. Later, my family had our new house constructed and we moved out of our old one. These strange events followed us and got worse. One day when I was around 5, I was walking outside my room to walk downstairs. The moment I walked to the balcony, I felt someone grab my arm extremely roughly. I turn around and I just see a black figure holding my arm. I scream for my mother. My mother came running upstairs and she sees the black figure. She grabs my arm and tries to pull me away, but the figure will not let me go. She pulled as hard as she could and ripped me away from the black figure. As she does, the figure disappears and a giant hand mark is left on my arm. My mother runs downstairs and screams at my father to get my brothers and that they are leaving the house until it is blessed. We later had a priest come to our house and bless it. Afterward the activity stopped, but growing up, me and my second older brother would constantly have nightmares of this figure in our dreams doing awful things to us, but it had bright red eyes and would chase us. Nothing else has happened since then, and I still live in the house, but every once in a while I get this sudden fear from the staircase. I never go downstairs at night without the lights on out of fear of this thing that is possibly still here. I had spoken to my mother about the dreams and stuff that happened to her, but she tries to avoid talking about it since she believes the more we talk about it the more it would come back. She has told me though that she spoke with my grandfather about this figure, who refused to talk much about it since the first time she brought it up he went pale as a ghost. He said that the figure used to torment him as a child and his dad would tell him about the figure and how it would come for him as it did with him. My mother didn't realize that it was Ed and Lorraine Warren until we were watching a documentary about them, and she points out that they were the ones who came to her house. I was speechless and she was confused as I told her that they were the Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators, and that they were the ones who started publicly doing paranormal investigations, and there are famous horror movies that involve them. My mother freaks out and tells my father about it, and while my father was shocked, he didn't think much of it. I apologize if my story is a little all over the place, but this was my best attempt to explain my mother's story and my experience, since my mother doesn't like to talk about it much out of fear. From 2004 to 2007, my best friend Katie and I worked at a small, family-owned seafood restaurant in Winchester Bay, Oregon. In 2006 we were invited by the cook and a small group of regulars to come to a bonfire on the bay to watch the fireworks with them on the 4th of July. Thinking it sounded interesting and having no other plans, we agreed to come. Upon arrival, we find the boys drinking next to a huge fire situated in a large clearing-type strip of grass. There are a ton of regulations about burning in Oregon because of the risk of wildfires that can burn out of control very quickly. So this huge grassy area was perfect, especially since they had created a secure fire pit before lighting anything. This grassy stretch was surrounded on 3 sides with dense thickets of evergreens. There was one wide, clearly defined trail that led through the trees to the water's edge and a gravel parking area behind us. Being 20 years old, we weren't opposed to drinking, but we didn't know these men that well. We decided to stay sober and just enjoy the fire and the upcoming show in the sky, just in case they started acting inappropriately. After chatting for a bit, the guys decide they want to partake in an herbal smoking session. Katie and I say no thanks, and the boys head off into the trees to puff the chiba. Katie and I are standing alone by the fire, just vibing and enjoying the evening. Suddenly I get this strange sensation and my eyes keep wandering to a specific area of the tree line. It's a crawling sensation which I'm trying to ignore, but I can't help myself, I just keep glancing over. After a minute or two, an older woman comes walking out of the trees. She was not on or near the trail. This tiny woman had walked through an area of thick undergrowth in the pitch black. She was short and looked frail, although it was hard to tell as she was dressed in layers of raggedy long skirts or dresses and had several shawls or blankets wrapped around her shoulders like a human rag bag. She was hunched over and walking slowly, as if she were older and her joints were bothering her. She was a little over 100 yards away and it was twilight, so I couldn't make out her face or features. Just her outfit, which, not gonna lie, was pretty creepy. Figuring she was a homeless person who deserved some respect and sympathy, I tried not to stare. However, when I looked over at Katie, she was watching this woman too. The woman had a force or vibe about her that made it hard not to watch her. She gave off the feeling of a wild animal in your house, when you know it's probably not too dangerous but you have to keep your eyes on it just in case it becomes aggressive before you can get it out, if that makes sense. A feeling of unease that I kept trying to shake. Katie turns to me and asks if I'm seeing this. I reply yes, she's probably just a homeless person, poor lady. Katie responds by telling me that the woman is giving her a weird feeling and it makes her skin crawl to the point that Katie feels she shouldn't look away. This validation of my misgivings is not comforting. Katie and I stand in silence, watching the woman make her slow, tottering way along the tree line to our front left. I am still feeling bad for staring and I'm going through all the reasons in my head that I'm an idiot for worrying about a decrepit grandmother, even if she does look like a stereotypical witch. Suddenly the woman comes to a complete stop. Until this moment she had been looking at the ground. She now stops, raises her head, and looks directly at us. A feeling of dread immediately hits me in the gut. My stomach drops. Her look feels malevolent even though I still can't make out facial features in the dusk. She then raises her left arm and points straight at us while letting out the most blood-curdling screech I've ever heard in my life. I think my heart stopped beating for a second. Then, and I will have this image in my head until the day I die, right in front of her pointing finger a silhouette of a human made of what looked like black mist coalesced, a shadow person, the first one I'd ever seen. I don't know if it just appeared or if it actually came from her body. I barely had time to register what I was seeing before the thing flew towards us. It moved so incredibly fast that it blurred and covered about 300 feet in less than 3 seconds. This thing passed directly between me and Katie, on my left and her right. It literally blew my hair back over my shoulder on that side when it rushed past us. We spent several seconds in complete shock, staring at each other with bloodless pale faces. Simultaneously, we both turned to look at the woman. She was no longer looking at us or acknowledging us in any way, but had picked up her pace and was doing a hobbling sort of run in the direction she had originally been headed, eyes on the ground. Katie and I stood in silence, each afraid we might have just gone mad. At first I was afraid to ask her if she'd seen that thing, but looking at her face I knew she had seen something. When she finally asked if I had seen what she just did, because she wasn't sure if it was real. We compared notes and realized that we had both witnessed the same thing. When I started freaking out about the fact that this thing had been real enough to blow my hair back, she admitted that while she did not experience her hair moving, she had seen my hair blow back as she turned her head to watch it move between us. I have no idea who that woman was or what she sent after us. It looked like a shadow person. But who knows what they even are, and never in my life have I ever heard of a shadow person doing a living person's bidding, and I have looked into it after this experience. I have never seen her again and I surely never want to. This experience has bothered me for years and so I bring it to the internet to find out if anyone else has ever witnessed a shadow person and a living person working together? Or to at least get some theories as to what the hell happened that night. I think we saw the shadow thing once more a couple nights later, but it didn't have a human shape that time, so I'm not sure if it was the same entity, but the timing seemed too coincidental. I was a sergeant in the U.S. Army and ETSing, getting out from the military when President Bush ordered more troops into Iraq in 2003. I had just returned home to Austin, Texas, when I was summoned into my local National Guard unit at Camp Mabry and told that I was being recalled to the Army, but the unit was already tasked out to deploy to Iraq. I was not part of their unit yet, so the commander offered to give me a waiver to deploy with a government contractor, Halliburton, in Houston. I knew that I would make more money as a contractor, so I took the offer. Not long after arriving in Kuwait at Camp Doha, I began working with the operations team overseeing logistics affairs. We would oversee the daily convoy of supply between Kuwait and Baghdad, a route riddled with IED incidents, small arms skirmishes, and almost constant breakdowns of army and civilian vehicles. Because I was a SAW gunner in the 1st Infantry Division while in active duty, and was technically still in the Guard, I was often in the convoys manning a mounted weapon that accompanied the mostly civilian convoys. During these runs we had a few strange encounters in an area south of Baghdad known then as Camp Babylon. Occupied by French troops, but then designated an archaeological site for obvious reasons, Camp Babylon was set up in the area that was said to originally be inhabited by the famous Tower of Babel. Indeed, there were ruins there that did look like a massive structure once stood at that spot. I had 2 strange incidents happen to me while passing through there. The first incident seems a bit benign, but sets the mood for the second. We were passing through Camp Babylon in the afternoon one day when our convoy took small arms fire. The SOP at the time, standard operating procedure, was to stop the convoy and return fire. This was because, in the past, such incidents ended up being a lone gunman attempting to scare the convoy into running into IEDs on the road. Because of this, the SOP changed to stop the convoy, dismount, and return fire. While engineers looked for explosive devices on the road, we scanned the horizon for enemy. Nothing. They most likely fled immediately. However, the ruins around Camp Babylon were alive with shadow figures that seemed to move about the area. Several times we would spot the figures, but they would immediately disappear. A contractor, lying beside me with his weapon, commented, "How odd that we are in the shadow of Babel and fighting the supernatural." I didn't respond, but knew he was a 32nd degree Mason who was really into the arcane aspects of Babylon, etc. I didn't feel, at the time, that much was supernatural, but certainly did see the shadowy, and bizarrely small, figures dart about the structures. Once the road was deemed clear, we continued on to Baghdad. The second incident occurred about a month later. At this point the weather in southern Iraq and Kuwait had turned quite cold at night. During this encounter, we had just completed the supply run to Baghdad and were returning back to Camp Doha in Kuwait when a vehicle in our convoy broke down. Once again, we found ourselves right at Camp Babylon. While the army mechanics took a look at the vehicle, and the rest of us took up fighting positions around the area, strange things began to occur. It started with a strange light bobbing in the desert. Thinking it was a person with a flashlight, we used NVGs, night vision goggles, to watch. It was simply a glowing ball of light moving towards a set of ruins. After initial contact with the light, a few of us had moved forward away from the convoy to see what the source was. After seeing it was self-contained, and not a person, we were a bit alarmed. Then we heard a sound that I will never forget. A long wailing began from one of the ruined structures/foundations not far away. It sounded like a woman in agony, mixed with loneliness. On and on the sounds went while we huddled in the cold and dark, wondering what the hell we were listening to. With our NVGs equipped, we used our flashlights to spotlight the ruins. If you've ever done this, you will know that a normal flashlight with NVGs looks like a massive beam of light. We scoured the area, but no source of the wails, or the ball of light, were seen. About this time we were told via radio that the vehicle was repaired and ready to roll, so we decided to return to the convoy. I was slinging my saw over my shoulder when I noticed my contractor partner was staring at the ruins in horror. He was frozen. I shook him and he snapped out of his stupor, quickly leaving the area with the rest of us. Once we were back at the camp, and it was pleasantly daylight the following morning, several of us were chatting about the encounter at Camp Babylon before our daily operations briefing. It was then that I remembered the terrified expression on the face of the contractor. So I asked him about it. He was still obviously traumatized by the event, but managed to explain that, as we were leaving our position on the sandy hill, He saw a tall, black figure standing beside the ruins. It was watching us as we were looking for it. He said that he felt an instant wave of despair hit him and thought that he was going to die. He didn't remember leaving the area. His next memory was in the Humvee headed back to Kuwait. I now write non-fiction books about haunted places for Llewellyn Publishing and have visited hundreds of reputedly haunted spots. But I'll never forget the wailing figure at the ruins of Babel. It's also worth noting that when I related this story to some of our Pakistani employees at Camp Doha and Camp Arif Jan, they also were quite horrified. One of them, a translator we called Artie, said that we had encountered a Djinn or a damned spirit and that we were lucky to be able to tell the tale. I agree. Shortly after my husband and I got married in 2006, 21 years old, we rented a 2-bedroom house with another couple. This house was old. Like pre-World War I old. Walking in the front door, you actually went down a couple steps through a mud room, entered the kitchen, and went straight through to the dining room, which had the bathroom door on the right side of it, a closet door on the left side, and the laundry/utility room in the back. Or, you entered the kitchen and went up the stairs to the left, which brought you into the living room, and the 2 bedrooms were on either side of that. The bedroom my husband and I got would have been above the kitchen, the living room sat over the dining area, and the room our roommates picked was over the utility room. Important. Theirs was a cute little room, and apparently the newest, as it had been added to the original house at some point, I'm guessing still a long time ago though. They asked us outright if they could have that one. Fine with me, ours had a nice double closet. Anyway, within weeks of living here, we noticed small, unexplainable, though not really scary, things go on there. My sister came over to help me paint the bathroom one afternoon, and we put a CD in the CD player and sat it on the dining room table. One track comes on and sister says how much she hates this song. I said too bad, I love it, and not 10 seconds later, it turns off. Or so I thought. I walk over and it's very clearly still spinning, hasn't paused or skipped or anything. I see that the volume dial is all the way down though. I'd cow a dial turns itself down, but sister laughs and says something about how there's a ghost here who doesn't like that song either. So I turn the dial back up and go back to painting. This thing seriously turned its own dial back down to 0 volume, 3 more times during this one song. It was funny once, but after that it was just unsettling. It never did that again on any other song. A couple of months later, I wake up in the morning and see some random DVD cases and box sets on our bedroom floor, maybe 4 or 5, all from different shelves of the DVD tower. Not like the tower itself tipped, because there would have been a much bigger mess. But the tower was also pulled like 4 inches out from the wall. It wasn't like that before bed. Never figured that out either, and it was only the one time. A few more months go by with little strange things like that for my husband and me, but apparently things are much more uncomfortable for our roommates in their room. They totally regret asking for the room they did. The girlfriend says there's just a creepy feeling in there at times. Boyfriend says he feels a male presence in there he gets a bad feeling from. But we've been there less than a year, what are you gonna do? We put up with it. Morning trips to the bathroom find random items placed in the middle of the bathroom floor for no reason. Roommates ask me to please stop shutting their bedroom door every night while they're sleeping because it gets too hot in there, but it isn't me or hubby shutting their door. One afternoon I'm the only one home. Showered, dressed for work, purse is on the bed ready to go. I'm standing by my bedroom doorway combing my hair, just happen to be looking across the living room, in the direction of roommate's open bedroom door. It's kind of dark in there so I can clearly see all the little red and green lights on the different appliances of their big entertainment system set up on the wall next to their door. This black mass freaking floats past the wall. I would say a shadow, but it was solid. It was blocking the rows of lights on the DVD/VHS players, TV, cable box, video game consoles, etc., as it moved past them. So as these little lights got blocked and then visible again, I can see how this mass is moving in the direction from their doorway to the back corner of the room. I froze. I put my comb down slowly, grabbed my purse without taking my eyes off their doorway, and got downstairs as fast as possible. Didn't brush teeth, didn't put on makeup, don't even remember locking the door on my way out. Just bolted to the car and raced to work. When I got there I was still so stunned my coworkers said I looked like I saw a ghost. I blurted out I think I did. Well, eventually the other couple moves out. Not because of the strangeness, as that wasn't all the time, but because their relationship had gotten volatile and we couldn't all stay living together. A high school friend of ours moved in to help pitch in for rent. The very first week he's there, in the bad room, he tells us he doesn't like it, he feels a male presence in there and it's not benevolent. Now this is a 22-year-old, 6 feet 5 inches black Dominican man who probably weighed 300 pounds at the time. And living in the places he had up till then, this man had seen some shit. But whatever was in there, he came to hate to sleep in that room. And he almost never stayed in the house if my husband or I wasn't there. Now, I have to add, this dude smoked a lot of weed. Not usually at the house, but still, enough to make us unsure about how bad that room really was, and what was just his imagination. Plus I had told him about the weird little things that would happen sometimes, even though hubby swore there must be a rational explanation, so I could have sparked his imagination about something. But after he moved in, my sister slept over a couple times and stayed on our living room couch, just across from roommate's doorway, and she absolutely could not sleep unless his door was closed all the way. The room was empty at night as the roommate worked the overnight shift as a security guard. But his door had to be closed for her to sleep. Just a bad feeling, she said. Well, one night, I'm the first one home from work at about 11:30 p.m. Roommate probably went into work about an hour ago. Hubby should be home in 15 minutes or so and I'm in the kitchen making some late dinner for when he comes in. I'm at the stove, and I hear a light scratchy noise coming from the dining room. I ignore it until it becomes a light tapping noise and now my cat's ears are up. I follow Kitty through the dining room to the laundry room, the room just under the haunted bedroom. The tapping is definitely just behind the laundry room door. While I'm standing there deciding if a raccoon or something somehow got in there, though there's really no way it could have, it starts turning from tapping to knocking. Now the cat is ready to push open the door and investigate, but fuck that. Either someone is in there or a wild animal is gonna give us rabies or something. So I put some heavy bags in front of the door to keep the cat from trying to open it. So now the knocking isn't just on the door. Now it's legit banging around and they're all over the room. I'm about to shit myself when hubby calls asking if he should stay at work at the hospital for some overtime. I said to him, hell no, you get home now, I'm about to call the police, there is someone or something big in our laundry room. So he begins to make his way home, and the noise dies down enough that my heart starts beating normally again. I have a huge butcher knife in one hand, my phone in the other with the 9 and the 1 already punched in, just waiting. A few minutes goes by and I'm starting to think an animal has tired itself out in there. Then it goes fucking wild. I can hear it all over the shelves. I can hear the tools falling onto the floor, the bottles of laundry detergent crashing onto the washing machine. I can just see in my mind everything on every shelf being thrown around wildly. I'm paralyzed. My cat is cowering and paralyzed. When I get feeling back, I head toward the front door with knife and phone, and call Kitty to follow me. And then it all stops. It is absolutely silent. It's totally over. And I see hubby's headlights coming up the driveway. He walks in and hugs me till I stop shaking. We have to find out what's in that room now. He's 6 feet 1 inch and was probably 275 pounds back then, so I'm hiding behind him with a knife getting ready to help him tackle a burglar or incapacitate a big-ass rabid fox or something. I can only imagine the mess in there. We get the door open and nothing comes out. Turn the light on, and I'm telling you, not one damn thing is even out of place. Shelves are intact, tools and laundry supplies are neat where they belong. I have no explanation for this entire event. It probably took me 3 days to go back in that room by myself, But after that, nothing weird ever happened. Not in that room anyway. But that bedroom above it. Always weird. Big macho roommate would get freaked out because the cat wouldn't really go in there, but sit at the doorway looking up in the back right corner of the room all the time, eyes wide, tail twitching. This was the back corner of the same wall I saw that black mass thing headed to from the doorway back when original roommates lived there. Hadn't told new roommate about that, wasn't sure if I even believed my own eyes about what I saw back then. Roommate started getting uncomfortable there, told us later on that there was a disturbing male presence driving him crazy in there. He started bringing different girls home some nights to sleep in there with him, and really just staying away from home more and more until he finally moved out just months after he'd moved in. His family comes to visit ours a few times a year still, and to this day he doesn't like when I bring up the time we spent living there. Fast forward to mid-2008. We've got a 3-month-old boy now, and 2 days a week I'm also babysitting my sister's 6-month-old girl. Our son has the haunted room, but now it's an adorable, sailboat-themed nursery. For months, the only weird things happening are that when my niece is in my son's crib, she stands up and stares at that same corner the cat did, and puts her hand outstretched towards it like she's looking for someone to come down to her. Also, she had a bouncer in our living room that also allowed her to swivel around, and on more than one occasion, I was so glad when my mom was visiting one afternoon to witness this. She would spin super fast around and around giggling, then make a dead stop facing the doorway and stare up in that corner for a few seconds. Then go back to spinning and stop on a dime again to stare. We couldn't see anything there but an empty corner. It wasn't scary, but weird. By the time my son was about 6 months old, he was sleeping in his own room at night in the crib. No issues with that room lately except the cat was still weirded out by it. In fact, one time Kitty got closed in there, I don't know how, that's the only time that happened since he usually didn't go in there. I heard him eventually, frantically scratching to get out, and when I opened the door he shot out of there, and there was diarrhea all over the floor right in front of the door. Poor Kitty was scared half to death and totally shit himself. Baby was fine until about 9 months old, and then the bad nights started. Our usually happy baby could not sleep through the night anymore. We tried everything. I did the cry for 10 minutes, go in and pat his back, sneak back out, repeat thing for hours a night. I tried to lay on the floor next to the crib. It got to where nights were either spent completely sleepless trying everything out, or giving up and laying with him on the couch until he passed out on top of my husband or me. He was such a sweet and happy boy during the day. But this affected everything. If we were visiting somebody and it was dark out when we left their house, he would scream for the entire walk to the car until we got him in and got the dome light on. Our 9-month-old was afraid of the dark already. This all went on for weeks but felt like years. One night we got him to sleep as usual, and as usual he woke up a little while later screaming bloody murder. Hubby and I went in and as soon as I picked him up, he started these heaving sobs. I bounced him, rocked him, hubby rubbed his head while I held him, and he calmed. I turned around to face the crib, now baby is facing that corner over my shoulder, and he starts screaming and flailing in my arms. I turn around so now I'm looking at the corner and there's nothing there, but he calms again. So now I'm starting to put it together, and over the next few minutes we go back and forth between calming him down and letting him face the corner, and he screams every time he's facing that direction. He's putting his hand up and out like he's trying not to be there. I'd had it by then. Hubby is still a skeptic, but something is happening that's unnatural and traumatizing, and I'm not keeping baby in there. It can scare us and our roommates but not the baby. Forget it. He slept in our room for the next week. The people I talk to about this difficulty at home are my parents, my husband's great aunt and his stepmother. They are all Christians, but not terribly superstitious, and surprisingly they all believe me that something is wrong. My father offered to come help disassemble the crib and move it to the living room and get that room shut off. I declined shutting off the room just yet, but I could hardly believe that he was so serious about it, as he's a very logical man. That actually scared me more. My mother got a vial of holy water from my grandmother, which we put on top of the wardrobe in that corner. Hubby's great-aunt gave us a Blessed Mother medallion to hang over the crib. His stepmother suggested prayers to say over baby at night. A couple weeks pass using all the various items and suggestions from the family, and some nights are better than others, so there's a little hope. One night was terrible again. When my sister came to drop her daughter off with me the next morning, she asked what was wrong because I must have looked terrible. I gave as quick an explanation as I could, showed her the things we've been trying, and she goes, "No, this is ridiculous." She walks into my son's room, looks straight up in the bad corner, hands on hips, foot stamped down, and with all of her 5 feet 1 inch Irish fury, says, "You have to go. I don't know who or what the fuck you are, but this is not your room anymore. This is my nephew's room. It's his now and you are scaring the shit out of him. Wherever you came from, you have to go now." You guys aren't gonna believe me, but that's the legit end of my story. Nothing else happened. I kept the religious items in there just in case they were helping, but for all the years of bullshit I just wrote out about this house, not one thing happened after that. And we moved about a year later. Crazy shit, and I'm really glad to have found a place to get it all out. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the paranormal. If you have any personal experiences or stories that you would like to share, please leave a comment below. Remember to subscribe to our channel for more exciting content, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the unknown.